Some stories don't start with a scream. They start with a small wrong detail, the kind your body notices before your mind can explain. A quiet driveway, a familiar car where it shouldn't be, and a split second where your heart decides without asking you that something sacred is already breaking. Tonight, we're not here to clap when someone gets what they deserve. We're not here to throw stones or pick sides. We're just going to step into this with a little stillness, because sometimes the worst moment of a life isn't the end of it. Sometimes it's the door that slams shut so another one can finally open, even if it hurts like hell at first. I went to visit my dad. I saw my wife's car parked at his gate. I didn't honk. I didn't call out. I walked closer, held my breath, and listened through the door until I heard them say my name like I wasn't a person anymore. What they said didn't just wound me. It rewrote my past, threatened my child's future, and forced me to choose stay quiet and lose everything, or finally fight for what's mine. Stay with me. Before I share the story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And if you've ever been blindsided by the people you loved most, please subscribe because stories like mine don't end when the door closes. My name is Blaze Calder. And now, let me tell you everything. It had been 3 weeks since I last visited my dad's place out on the edge of Cedar Bluff. Evan had brought it up that morning at breakfast, said he missed Grandpa's workshop and the way the old tractor smelled like the inside of a metal dragon. That's how he put it. I smiled, told him we'd drive up after school. Just a normal visit. Just a father taking his son to see his grandfather. That's the story I repeated in my head all the way down that narrow county road, trying to believe it. The trees had gone half bare, scattering crisp leaves across the gravel shoulder. My heater barely kept up with the chill, but Evan was bouncing in the back seat, humming whatever tune was stuck in his 11-year-old brain. I took the last turn before Dad's property, the tires crunching over loose rock, and then I saw it, her car. Sloane's car. It was parked close to the house, right beside the rusted shovel Gordon always leaned against the porch railing. Her powder blue SUV, spotless, the dream catcher she insisted on keeping dangling from the rear view, swaying slightly in the wind. The sight of it stopped me cold. My hands went stiff on the wheel. Every instinct I had screamed that something wasn't right. I didn't honk, didn't call, didn't text. I backed up and turned into the brushy pull-off a few yards back, killed the engine. Evan leaned forward between the seats, peering through the windshield. "Is that Mom's car?" he asked. "Yeah," I said after a moment. "Let's be quiet, okay, bud?" He nodded, sensing my tone. I helped him out of the car, gestured for him to stay close, and led him around the house's left side through the overgrown patch beside the shed. I knew this path well. It was the one I used to sneak out when Dad's temper got dangerous. Today I wasn't sneaking out. I was sneaking in. The gravel shifted beneath our feet. Evan didn't speak. He just clutched my hand tighter. We reached the back steps where the wooden porch creaked with age. I guided Evan down beside me and placed my ear gently to the faded redwood of the back door. Voices. I heard her first. Sloane. Blaze always panics, she was saying, voice low but sharp. He twists everything. That man lives in a storm of his own making. Then came Gordon. His voice rough as unfiltered bourbon slid through the wood like smoke. He was always that way. Couldn't handle pressure if it crawled up and kissed him on the mouth. They weren't arguing. They weren't whispering. They were comfortable. Like two coworkers discussing quarterly metrics, except the numbers they were crunching were my life. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. I just listened. "Insurance money's nearly gone," Sloane said flatly. I stretched it, made it look good. "But we need the next step or we're stuck. Insurance. My mother's policy." Gordon's voice dropped to a near growl. We waited long enough. "What about the kid? Evan's not the issue," she snapped. "Blaze is. He still thinks he has control. Control." I felt my knees press harder into the wood. "Just keep poking the therapy angle," Dad muttered. "You got him to sign enough paperwork. Let the court see he's unwell, emotional, overwhelmed. I've got logs. Screenshots. Notes from that counselor he saw twice. Sloane's voice chilled. I told him to keep going. He refused. That works in our favor. My stomach twisted. Every sleepless night I'd confess to her every worried word about Evan's future, every fragile truth I handed them to her thinking she was my wife. She was building a case. Gordon chuckled. You're sure about keeping the boy? He's better off with me, Sloane said. And with Blaze out of the house, everything stays cleaner, legally and otherwise. I turned to Evan, whose small fingers clutched mine like they sensed the quake in my soul. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the air. I couldn't let him hear more. We crept back the way we came, each step on the gravel louder than the last inside my pounding head. I buckled Evan in. Drove. I don't remember the road, don't remember the town. But I remember this. I didn't go to visit my father that day. I walked into a betrayal with my son in tow and left knowing the two people I trusted most had gutted me with a smile. I drove home beside a woman who would be asleep in our bed by midnight, and I said nothing. 3 months before that day, if you'd asked me if I was happily married, I would have said yes. No hesitation. We lived in a modest house off Hawthorne Lane, 3 bedrooms, a creaky back porch, and a fireplace that never worked quite right. Evan was thriving in school, reading way above his grade level, building Lego cities with borderline obsessive precision. Sloane handled the budget, the scheduling, the insurance documents. She was always so organized, so capable. It made me feel like I could finally breathe. After all, I grew up in a house where capable meant survival. Gordon Calder didn't believe in hugs or high fives. He believed in results. Mistakes earned silence, sometimes worse. My only real escape had been the county library, and now, ironically, I worked there down in the archival room, organizing documents no one else wanted to touch. It was quiet, predictable. Unlike Sloane, she made life look effortless. She always knew what to say to make me feel better. Or worse. You're doing your best, Blaze, she'd whisper when I'd panic over some forgotten bill. You're a good man. You just need rest. Let me handle this. So I did. That summer, she started bringing her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. She said she was watching market trends. Then she started bringing up the insurance money, how we should put some aside for Evan's future, how she was researching college funds, private school options, better therapists. It sounded generous. Then Dad started calling more. His voice on the phone had changed, softer, almost amused, when he asked how Sloane was. He never cared much for my personal life before. I chalked it up to aging. Maybe he was mellowing. But the first real crack in the picture came one Tuesday at the library. I was shelving returns when I heard Tessa whispering behind the counter. They were sitting so close. It was weird. Like, not just in-laws weird. I paused. Who, someone asked. Sloane Calder, Tessa said. And Gordon. I saw them at the diner Monday. Booth in the back, laughing like they were planning a heist. The words hit like a slap. I walked away before I could hear more. Later that day, Mabel, my supervisor, offhandedly mentioned, Your dad seems more social lately. Never saw him at the diner much before. Now he's there twice a week. I wanted to believe Sloane was just helping him with something. Maybe legal papers, maybe settling old accounts. That night I asked her softly, careful not to sound accusatory. She didn't flinch. Your dad needed help. He's been nervous about estate stuff. Didn't want to bother you. She turned the conversation gently toward me. You've seemed tense lately, Blaze. Maybe talk to someone again just to unload a little. I nodded, because I did feel tense, like I was always one wrong word away from being misunderstood. A week later, she said she was going to Dad's to help him clear out the shed. When she came home, the car was spotless, no mud, no smell of dust or oil, like it hadn't gone anywhere near Gordon Calder's gravel driveway. She said it rained. It hadn't. I said nothing. That night I watched Evan sleep and told myself, keep the peace, keep the family. Don't ruin what's good over a few weird coincidences. But Sloane stepped outside to take a call around 10 p.m., came back in smiling like nothing happened, and I realized there was a whole world she lived in that didn't include me, and I had no idea how long that world had existed. The signs weren't random anymore. They were pieces. Sharp-edged, quiet pieces that had been falling into place for months, maybe longer, but now they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. It started with small things. Too small at first to make noise. Sloane would casually mention details about my work schedule, things I hadn't told her yet. Or she'd remind Evan of a change in his school day before the email even hit my inbox. When I asked her how she knew, she'd smile that calm, unreadable smile and say, "I just guessed." Lucky guess, I guess. But her guesses were always right. At first I chalked it up to coincidence. Then I remembered how Gordon used to pry information out of people without them realizing, how he'd stand in a doorway long enough, quiet enough, until someone spilled something they didn't mean to. And then I remembered the only other person I talked to regularly was Evan, my 11-year-old son. Trusting, observant, always eager to please. My stomach turned. One night after Evan went to bed, Sloane sat across from me at the kitchen table and brought up the life insurance policy from my mom again, except this time she named the exact amount. Down to the cent. It's not about spending Blaze. It's about reallocating for long-term growth. I've been looking into high-yield accounts, maybe even early trust options for Evan. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, so polished, like she'd rehearsed it. Like it wasn't the first time she'd explained this to someone. "You remember that form you signed last month," she added. "The bank needed it for authorization." I nodded slowly, ice settling in my spine. I remembered signing something. A thick white envelope she handed me in the middle of a hectic Tuesday, saying it was a document for refinancing strategy in case interest rates spiked. I'd signed it because I trusted her, because I didn't want to start another fight. Now I wasn't so sure what I'd signed. I tried to approach it sideways. The next morning, I casually asked her if she'd seen Gordon recently. She didn't flinch. "He called about helping with some paperwork," she said, brushing crumbs off Evan's shirt as if we were discussing the weather. "Blay, I think your stress is getting worse. Maybe it's time you talk to someone again." By that afternoon, she'd booked me a therapy appointment for Friday. "Just to help you cope better," she said gently. Too gently. Like she'd expected my question. It was becoming obvious therapy wasn't just therapy anymore. That night, Evan climbed into my lap while I was reading on the couch. He leaned his head against my chest and said, "Mom said if you're too tired lately, I could stay with her for a while. Just until you're not so sleepy all the time." I didn't react right away. I just held him a little tighter. But my mind exploded. That wasn't a comment. That was a test balloon. A trial script slipped into our son's world like it was harmless. I waited until everyone was asleep. Then I dug through the filing cabinet in our hallway bottom drawer where we kept family documents, bank statements, insurance letters, the kinds of things Sloane always handled for convenience. I found opened envelopes, statements I'd never seen, an unfamiliar account summary tucked behind Evan's school records. Some of the documents had my signature on them. At least they looked like my signature. I made photocopies of everything. 2 days later, I walked into the bank where we kept our joint accounts and asked to speak to someone about a few routine verifications. I kept my voice casual, light, no accusations. The woman at the desk, Marion Holt, her name tag read, smiled and pulled up our records. "Looks like these were already authorized," she said, scrolling through a screen I couldn't see. "We have signed permission from both parties here. Let me know if there's anything that needs to be updated." I thanked her. I asked for a printed record of the authorized transactions. She handed it to me without blinking. I read the names, the dates, the amounts, and one line stood out: a document signed B. Calder authorizing Sloane to manage a restructuring of the home equity. I never signed that, not willingly. I walked out of the bank with the papers folded tight in my coat pocket and a fire building in my chest. That evening, I went to the library, logged into one of the public computers, and searched everything I could find on legal custody, marital fraud, and digital forensics. I read articles about contested signatures, cases of manipulated therapy records, steps to freeze joint accounts, and how to prepare silent evidence. I made notes, bullet points, steps. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was war. That night, after Evan was asleep and Sloane was watching TV in our bedroom, I stood in the kitchen drinking cold coffee and staring at nothing. If I confronted her now, she'd shut it down. She'd hide everything. She'd rewrite the narrative. But if I played the role the agreeable husband, the anxious dad, the cooperative patient, I could document everything. Quietly, methodically. I looked through the pass-through into the living room and watched her laugh at something on her phone. She didn't even know I was there. So I made a promise to myself from now on I would be invisible, but I would see everything. The next morning I woke up before the sun and outlined my strategy on the back of Evan's old math notebook. I called it my containment plan. Rule 1. Never confront directly. Rule 2. Never accuse without evidence. Rule 3. Never let her see me watching. I listed the 4 domains of risk: finances, property custody, and mental health records. I gave each one a code color. I needed to think like a stranger looking into my life. I needed to see how I was being framed and how to unframe it. That afternoon, I drove to Cedar Bluff Office and Supply. I bought 2 mini voice recorders and a handful of blank micro SD cards. Then I crossed town to an electronics store and picked up a pair of small wireless cameras marketed as discrete home monitors. One was shaped like a USB charger, the other clipped behind a bookshelf. When I got home, I told Sloane I was worried about the break-ins that had been happening nearby. I said I wanted to keep an eye on the hallway while Evan slept. She didn't ask questions. She nodded, poured wine, and said, "You're finally being proactive. I'm proud of you." I almost laughed. That night I suggested something I knew she wouldn't resist. "Why don't we invite Dad over for dinner?" I asked, making sure my voice sounded tired but hopeful. "You've been handling everything lately. Maybe it's time I tried to bring the family closer again." She hesitated only a second. "Then I'll call him. Let me handle it." I watched her carefully. She didn't even ask me what day worked for me. She just moved to the living room and picked up the phone. She wanted to be the one to control the invitation. I installed the camera that evening, one pointed at the living room from the hallway shelf, the other clipped behind the flower vase on the bookshelf. The voice recorder I carried in my pocket. The dinner was set for Thursday. When Gordon arrived, he walked in like he lived there. Tossed his jacket over our banister, kissed Evan on the head, and sat down like it was his table. Sloane beamed and called him Dad with that smooth, easy tone I'd once thought was charm. Now I heard control in it. Performance. They talked about Evan's school, the weather, a broken fence near the back of the property, but every so often they'd glance at me like measuring when to shift gears. It came during dessert. Blake Gordon said, chewing slowly, "You ever think about what you're leaving Evan long-term?" Sloane picked up from there. "We were talking about refinancing the house," she said casually, "just to optimize interest rates. It's already in process." I froze. "Refinancing?" She nodded, smiling. "Yeah. You signed the form I gave you last month. Remember, it's just procedural. I didn't want to stress you." Gordon chimed in, mentioning a lawyer I'd never met. "Should be done by next week," he said. "Clean paperwork." I nodded slowly, but inside, I was boiling. That night, after they'd both gone to bed, I transferred the footage from the camera to my external drive, replayed the audio from my pocket recorder. I had names, dates, context, intent, and then came the final blow. The next morning, Sloane reminded me of my therapy appointment. "I already gave them some notes," she said, "just so they understand you better." I tried to breathe evenly. "Notes?" I asked. "What kind?" "Nothing big, just some context. I mentioned how you sometimes stay up late, get anxious, overthink things. I want them to help you better." I smiled. I thanked her, and I understood. She wasn't documenting my healing. She was building a profile, and she was using a licensed professional to certify it. That night, I lay awake, the audio playing on repeat in my headphones. Her voice, Gordon's, saying things they didn't think I'd ever hear. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a full redesign of my identity, one they could use in court to take everything, including Evan. and I would not let that happen. The second I stepped into that bank again, it felt like crossing a line I couldn't return from. I wasn't here as the husband running errands. I wasn't here as the father casually checking in. I was here as a man trying to track where his life had bled out behind his back and who was holding the knife. I met Marion Holt in one of the smaller conference rooms, windowless quiet, just the hum of the AC and the clack of her keyboard. I kept my voice even casual. I'm building a tuition plan for Evan. I'd like to run a financial health check, pull up anything recent with the joint accounts authorizations withdrawals. She smiled. Of course. That's smart. But when the screen lit up, her face changed. Slightly. Just a flicker in the eyes. There it was, a joint account. But not with me. Gordon called her. Sloan called her. That account had been active longer than I'd expected. Small transfers 6 months ago, increasing to 4-figure moves just last month. The dates weren't random. They lined up with the moment Sloan started suggesting therapy. With the moment Gordon began calling more often, asking vague questions about Evan's school schedule, our mortgage, the status of my job. They weren't curious. They were coordinating. Marion hesitated. Some of these have your signature. Here on the authorization for that rollover. I leaned forward. Can I see that? The signature looked close. Too close. But the pressure was wrong. The loop on the B was too sharp. Like someone practiced a little too much. I kept my face still. I nodded. I'll need a copy of that. Also, if any documents are pending right now, especially mortgage-related, I'd appreciate a heads up. She clicked around, cautious now. There is one refinancing request in progress. It hasn't finalized yet, but it's queued to clear this week. I thanked her and walked out of there like nothing was wrong. But everything was. Back at the library, I found the corner computer, signed in, and started building my timeline. Sloan's push for therapy. My signatures showing up on things I didn't authorize. Her sudden interest in optimizing the insurance from my mom. The money movement. All of it lined up like puzzle pieces that suddenly made the picture clear. And worse, she was already prepping the school. When I picked Evan up early that day, the front office receptionist smiled at me and said, "Oh, his mom was just here the other day. She had a few questions about pickup procedures, changes to guardianship info." I forced a laugh. She's thorough, huh? Inside, I felt my spine go cold. She wasn't asking questions. She was preparing the exit strategy. I dropped Evan off at a friend's house that evening under the excuse of a last-minute project. I didn't want him anywhere near what I was about to hear. Because Sloan's car was at my father's house again. I parked 2 houses down and walked slow soft. The porch light was off. The windows were closed. But the kitchen window was cracked just enough. And I heard everything. The petition goes in next week. I've already drafted the affidavit. Sloan's voice was clear, controlled. Like this was just another task on her to-do list. "You'll be filing first, right?" my father asked. "Obviously. If Blaze gets a lawyer first, he'll drag it out and make it messy." "He won't," Gordon said. "He's always too slow. And he's tired. You keep pushing the therapy angle." Sloan chuckled. "Already did. I sent the doctor a few journal entries. He thinks Blaze is spiraling." That sentence hit like a bat to the ribs. They were building a legal record, fabricating my mental state to get custody of Evan. They'd use the therapy I was tricked into attending. The notes I never even knew she was sharing, the whole damn setup. And then I heard something that made me sick. Gordon asked, "What if he refuses to sign?" "He won't," she said. "And if he does, we'll make it look like he did." I stepped back from that window, bile in my throat. Not from the betrayal anymore. That was old news. But from the realization that I was now in a race. Not for my pride, not for revenge. For my son. The next morning I left Cedar Bluff. Not for good, but for clarity. I drove to the next town over and walked into a law office I'd researched for hours the night before. No connections to my father, no ties to anyone I knew. Just one name, Harlow Keene. Family law specialist. Cold eyes. Quick mind. I sat across from her in a bare room with white blinds and zero small talk. I laid it all out, the recordings, the forged signatures, the therapy ploy, the school contacts, the account statements. She didn't flinch. "You're not paranoid," she said. "You're already under fire." I swallowed hard. "So what now?" If Sloan files first, she could get a temporary emergency order. Judges don't need much to approve those when it involves a child, especially if she paints you unstable. And if she gets that order, you lose access to Evan maybe for weeks, maybe months. My hands clenched. "So we go first." "Almost," she said. "First, you need credibility. We get statements from the school, documentation from your bank, proof you're Evan's primary caregiver, and we need evidence that your wife is manipulating your medical history for personal gain." I nodded. "I'll get all of it." And I did. I contacted Reese Navarro, a private investigator I'd worked with once years ago through a friend. Discreet, unsentimental. "Follow them," I told him. "Not for affairs, for meetings, for signatures, for legal prep. I want timestamps, photos. Anything that smells like coordinated action." That afternoon, Marion called me from the bank. "There's a refinancing document queued for approval. It's big. And the signature? It doesn't look right." "Hold it," I said. "Whatever you do, don't process that document. Can you freeze it?" "Not without official intervention. Give me 48 hours. From there, it was a sprint. I visited Evan's school and sat with Mr. Adler, the counselor. "I want to file a written note," I told him. "Nothing dramatic. Just a factual record that I'm Evan's daily pickup, that he's stable, that I haven't missed a day in months." Adler agreed. He said Sloan had been by twice asking about policy, inquiring about alternate pickup names. She even asked about psychological resources for Evan just in case, he said. I nodded. "Please don't approve any changes without my signature. Double verification." Then came the moment I'd been dreading. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. It was an alert from my email, new login from an unknown device. Then another account linked with a device in Cedar Bluff. She'd been watching my moves, reading my emails. She probably knew about the lawyer already. I changed every password, switched devices, bought a burner phone, transferred every file to a drive I kept in my car. From that moment on, nothing digital was safe. That same night, Reese sent me photos, Sloan and Gordon, meeting not just at his house, but at a motel on Route 7, twice in 1 week, once at night, once during work hours. They weren't just co-conspirators, they were intimate. That shifted something in me. This wasn't about money or power. This was about control. They wanted my life, every piece of it, and they'd destroy me to get it. So I baited the hook. The next morning over breakfast, I mentioned offhandedly I got a letter from Mom's old insurance. Said something might have been missed, could be worth following up. Sloan barely blinked. But that night she was on the phone, in the bedroom. Door closed. I sat in the hallway, recorder on. "She said there's more insurance," she whispered. "We should hold off, at least a few weeks." I smiled in the dark. They were greedy, and greed is predictable. The next morning I met with Harlow again. We prepared the emergency filing, the motion to freeze accounts, and the request for custody protection. Everything timed to hit at once. As I drove home, my hands were steady. Tomorrow the war would go public. But tonight I'd watch the house I built, knowing the people inside had no idea how ready I was to burn it all down just to save what still mattered. The morning I filed for divorce, I didn't feel free. I felt cold, detached, like I was stepping into a war room, not a courthouse. But it wasn't rage that pushed me forward. It was clarity. And I knew exactly what I had to protect my son and whatever pieces of myself were still intact. Harlow laid the documents out in front of me with military precision. She'd prepared everything, the timeline, the signatures, the proof of financial fraud, the transcripts from the recordings, the photographs Reese took, even the school correspondence. "If you sign here," she said, "we prioritize custody. But understand, if we don't freeze that refinancing today, you may never see that money again." I looked down at the signature line. My name was already written across too many lies. I wasn't letting Evan be next. We go for custody, I said, but we shut the money down too. She didn't hesitate. Then we need to move. Right now. Just as we were compiling the emergency order, Marion from the bank called. Her voice was tight. The refinancing packet. It's queued to finalize today. All it needs is a digital confirmation, one click, and it clears by 3 p.m. My jaw locked. Can you stall it? I've flagged it under compliance review, but I can only hold that flag until noon. Harlow turned to me. If we miss this window, the money clears into their account. If that happens, we're chasing ghosts. We filed the request for emergency injunction and asset freeze in tandem with the divorce petition. Harlow highlighted Gordon's role, the dual account, the forged signature practices, and the clear attempt to move funds without informed consent. I signed every page with a hand that no longer trembled. Next came the setup for serving Sloan. Harlow timed it precisely lunchtime at her office, where she'd feel safe, maybe even smug. Reese would deliver the documents. Don't go home, Harlow warned me. She's going to hit back hard. Let her think she has control while we cut the strings. But Sloan moved first. At 10:24 a.m., I got a call from Evan's school. Mr. Calder, the receptionist, said. We had a woman come in asking to update the pickup list for Evan. She said she had an emergency and needed him released early. My stomach dropped. Who was she? She claimed to be your wife, but the ID didn't match exactly. I was already in my truck. Don't release him to anyone but me. I'm on my way. When I got there, I saw her. Not Sloan, but her cousin, the one she used to babysit Evan when he was younger. She was trying to fill out the early dismissal form, voice, low eyes, shifty. I stepped in fast. He's not leaving, not with anyone but me. The front desk hesitated, but I pulled out the authorization form I'd filed weeks ago, notarized with Harlow's seal. Dual confirmation required for any changes. I crouched next to Evan, who stood quietly by the wall, his backpack hugged to his chest. You okay, bud? He nodded, uncertain. They said there was an emergency. Not your emergency, I said. Let's go. As we were walking to the car, my phone rang again. It was Cedar Bluff PD. This is Officer Caleb Rourke. Mr. Calder, we've had a report filed today by your wife, Ms. Sloan Calder, stating concern about your mental stability. She's alleging erratic behavior threats made toward her and your son. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Would you be willing to come in and give a voluntary statement? I'm already on my way. At the station, I handed Evan off to a friend who owed me no loyalty to either side. Then I sat across from Officer Rourke and laid everything out in strategic sequence, no emotion, just the truth, the timeline, the evidence. I started with the joint account between Sloan and Gordon, showed the bank statements, walked him through the refinancing attempt, and handed him Marion's flagged report. Then I gave him the audio recording of Sloan and Gordon planning to manipulate my therapy records and take custody. I backed it up with the school's email confirming attempts to alter Evan's pickup routine. Then I placed the photographs from Reese on the table, Sloan and Gordon meeting repeatedly in private at motels during work hours. This isn't a marriage falling apart, I said. It's a coordinated effort to defraud, manipulate custody, and seize assets under fabricated mental health claims. Officer Rourke leaned back in his chair. We'll need to open a formal investigation. You should, I said. And you should check Gordon's storage unit. That was the last card. Reese had messaged me hours earlier. Found drafts of your signature, practice sheets, printouts, copies of refinance forms, locked cabinet in Gordon's secondary garage, physical evidence, intent, motive. That was the difference between hearsay and charges. By the end of the day, Caleb confirmed the asset freeze order was processed. The refinance was blocked. A formal investigation into fraud and custodial interference was underway. I was advised to relocate Evan temporarily and minimize all contact. They've lost money and leverage, Caleb said. People in that position get reckless. As I left the station, Evan's small hand found mine. I squeezed it like it was the only real thing left in the world. From now on, every step had to be ahead of them. Because I knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The safe house wasn't glamorous, but it had 3 locks on the door, clean sheets, and a coffee maker that actually worked. I set Evan up in the spare room with his sketchbook snacks and a soft explanation that made sense to a 7-year-old. Some adults made choices that weren't okay. Grown-up things. But you didn't do anything wrong. And I'm here. Always. We stayed off the grid. No calls, no texts. Everything through Harlow. Every document now had a chain of custody. Every step was measured. The fallout came fast. Cedar Bluff PD subpoenaed Gordon's storage unit. Inside, they found the proof multiple printouts of my signature-smudged copies of financial paperwork with hand-copied forgeries practice pages, with the loop of my B traced over and over again. There were even post-its needs more pressure too shaky. It was art in the worst way. That evidence combined with the recordings and bank flags pushed the DA's office to act. A no-contact order was issued for both Sloan and Gordon. Any attempt to reach Evan or me would be a violation. Still, they tried. Sloan sent a message through a mutual friend. This doesn't have to be ugly. I ignored it. She knew what she was doing when she started this war. The court date came quick. Harlow pulled every string. Emergency hearing expedited custody request. Inside the courtroom, Sloan looked polished, her hair curled just the way she liked it when she wanted sympathy. Gordon sat stiff beside her like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. I didn't look at either of them. My eyes were on the judge. Harlow laid it all out, the financial fraud, the manipulation of therapy records, the scheme to isolate Evan. She introduced the recordings, the bank logs, the school's confirmation, even a short character statement from Mr. Adler, the school counselor who had documented Evan's stability with me over the past year. Then I spoke. I told the truth. I'd gone to therapy because I believed my marriage was worth saving. But that vulnerability had been weaponized. I hadn't unraveled. I'd woken up. The judge ruled in my favor. Primary custody awarded to me. Supervised visitation for Sloan pending full evaluation. All communication routed through counsel. Any change required judicial review. It wasn't a victory lap, but it was protection. Financially, Marion provided a report showing the full map of withdrawals. Sloan and Gordon had funneled over $42,000 through side accounts masked under property improvements and service fees. The refinance scheme was voided, legally ruled invalid under forgery suspicion. I was offered the chance to sue. I declined for now. What mattered was that Evan had his home, his routines, his life. I used to think the hardest part was finding out the truth. But the truth is just the moment the lights come on. The hardest part is deciding what kind of person you'll be after that. In the end, I didn't win because I was smarter or tougher. I won because I stopped abandoning myself and I kept choosing my son quietly, consistently, even when my hands shook. And maybe that's the gentle thing we can take with us tonight. Sometimes we don't get a clean ending or an apology that heals anything. Sometimes we just get a chance to rebuild with steadier hands. We learn that kindness doesn't mean letting people take pieces of you, and love doesn't require you to stay small to keep the peace. If you've been listening, and you felt even a little seen, I'd love for you to stay with us. Subscribe not as a favor, but as a way to join a corner of the internet where people can breathe, listen, and share without being judged. And if you want to leave a few lines in the comments, where you're watching from, or what part of this story hit you the hardest. I read more than you think. Thank you for being here. Good night, and I'll see you in the next story.